Hey, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling a monster of a subject, environmental science. How do you even begin to grasp the most important stuff without getting totally lost? Well, we're going to go on a hunt for a kind of secret study guide. Let's get into it.
Seriously, it's a fair question, right? This field is just massive. It pulls from biology, chemistry, politics, you name it. It's so easy to feel completely swamped. So, where on earth do you start?
Okay, here's the big idea for today. What if the real key to understanding the subject wasn't buried in some 1,000-page textbook, but was actually hidden in the test itself? We're going to look at what might be the ultimate cheat sheet, the high-stakes, competitive exams that millions of people in India study for every single year. So, we're basically going to reverse engineer the curriculum by looking at the tests themselves. We're talking about major national exams in India, like the SLST for teachers or the SSC CGL for government jobs. The thinking is, these tests are carefully designed by experts to zero in on the absolute most critical environmental knowledge that an informed person should have. And just to give you an idea of the scale we're talking about, one single exam prep platform, Physics Wallah, has over 3.5 million students. Now, when you're designing a curriculum for that many people, you'd better believe it's been boiled down to the absolute essentials. This is our key, this is our secret study guide. So, what's the first thing our investigation shows us? Well, it turns out the entire subject is really built on just a handful of foundational concepts. These are the definitions, the big ideas that pop up over and over again. They're basically the building blocks of the whole science.
And the very first concept that these exams treat as totally non-negotiable is the ecosystem. You'll see study guides put this right at the beginning. It makes sense, right? It's the fundamental stage where all the action happens. It's all about the interaction between the living things, the biotic parts, and the non-living, abiotic parts, like sunlight, water, and soil.
Now, once you have the ecosystem, the curriculum immediately zooms in on biodiversity. And the really key thing that gets tested here isn't just, counting different types of animals. The exams force you to understand it on 3 separate levels: the genetic variety within a single species, the variety of different species, and the variety of entire ecosystems. It's on the test so often because, really, it's the ultimate report card for the planet's health.
Here's a perfect example of a classic exam question. Define eutrophication. It's a fantastic test case because it connects a specific human action, like fertilizer runoff from a farm, to a very clear environmental consequence. Those massive, choking algal blooms that suck all the oxygen out of the water. It's a core cause and effect relationship that you're just expected to know.
So after we identify the problems, the curriculum naturally moves on to the solutions. And a really common question will ask you to tell the difference between 2 main conservation strategies. You've got in situ, which is basically on-site protection, saving a species right there in its natural home, think of a national park. And then you have ex situ, or off-site protection, which is what you see in a zoo, or a botanical garden, or a seed bank. All right. Now, the exams make it pretty clear that just knowing the science isn't going to be enough. The curriculum demands that you also know the history, the key dates, the landmark laws, the big policies that have really shaped the environmental world we live in today. This timeline here reveals something really important about how this stuff is taught. It shows how India's own landmark national policies, like the Wildlife Protection Act and Project Tiger, are put right alongside major international agreements, like the Montreal Protocol. If you're taking one of these exams, knowing the sequence of events, both at home and around the world, is absolutely essential. Okay, these 3 agreements get mixed up all the time, so the exam guides really hammer home the differences. The Montreal Protocol was all about fixing the ozone layer by banning CFCs, the chemicals in old spray cans. Then came Kyoto, which focused on getting developed, industrialized nations to cut their greenhouse gas emissions. And finally, you have the Paris Agreement, which sets the current global game plan for all nations to limit warming.
So we've seen what's on the test, but now let's connect the dots and ask, why? Why these specific things? Well, how often these topics show up isn't random. It actually reflects their real-world importance and what experts have decided is absolutely essential for a well-rounded citizen to understand.
And an analysis from the Sathi Forum really backs this up. Just look at this breakdown. In a typical exam, you are virtually guaranteed to get questions on biodiversity and climate change. This isn't just trivia, folks. This data is telling us that these topics are the absolute heart of the curriculum. It shows us where the real educational focus is.
And here's a perfect example of how a really complex piece of history gets boiled down into a simple, testable fact. The Green Revolution was this enormous agricultural transformation back in the 60s. For these exams, that whole story is anchored to one name, M.S. Swaminathan, the father of the movement in India. Knowing who the key players are is just a required part of the curriculum.
So after all this detective work, after decoding the tests, what's the ultimate takeaway? Well, we can now build our own secret study guide, and it's based on the very same principles that are used to teach this subject to millions of people.
It really all boils down to a three-step approach. First, you've got to master the core concepts. Don't just memorize the words, actually understand the why behind things like a food chain. Second, connect those ideas to the real world. So don't just learn the term Ramsar site, know that the Sundarbans is a famous one. And third, you have to stay current. The environment isn't static, it's always changing. So keeping an eye on new summits and reports is absolutely crucial. That's really how you go from just memorizing facts to actually understand.
And that kind of brings us to our final thought here. We've used these exams as a tool, as a map to figure out what our society thinks is essential environmental knowledge. But, passing a multiple choice test isn't the real goal, is it? The real test, the one that actually matters, is what we, as informed people, decide to do with this knowledge out in the real world.